When you hear the name Paul Schrader, you might think of his work on films such as Taxi Driver or Raging Bull, or a wide variety of interesting Facebook posts. Or maybe the name means nothing to you at all, in which case that's understandable. Have a nice day. Back in 1973, Schrader became well known in Hollywood for breaking the record for highest paid screenwriter. His brother Leonard had been living in Japan to avoid the Vietnam War draft, and had been teaching English literature at Doshisha and Kyoto University. On the side, he was also exploring the seedier aspects of the country. When the student protests closed down many universities, Leonard started spending more and more time at establishments run by the Yamaguchi-gumi, the most powerful Yakuza group in the city. From these experiences, Leonard decided to write a novel about the group, but Paul convinced him to write the story for a screenplay instead. The script, which was sold for $325,000, or well over $1.5 million today, was simply titled The Yakuza. Despite the initial intrigue, the film was not a major success in America, grossing only $1.5 million against a $5 million budget. Reviews were similarly divided, with critics complimenting the performances but criticizing the plot and violence. Schrader believed the failure all came down to the choice of director, Sidney Pollack. Pollack was mostly known for his introspective dramas such as The Way We Were. For him, being the director for an action crime film seemed a bit strange. He wasn't the first choice for the job though. That would be Robert Aldrich, director of The Dirty Dozen. His films had a far more macho view that were in line with Schrader's B-movie Yakuza Eiga, as he called it.
Here for a mission which gives you just 3 ways to go. I will personally blow your brains out.
But conflicts with the film star Robert Mitchum meant Aldrich was kicked off the project and a search for a replacement director was on. Maybe if Aldrich had remained as director, the film would have been closer to Schrader's original intent. Or perhaps if it was Martin Scorsese, who was fresh off of his hit Mean Streets and was interested in directing the film. Ironically, Schrader turned him down because he wasn't Tiffany enough. Whereas Schrader's script was a violent and depressing one about blood, duty, and obligation, Pollack wanted a rich, romantic, transcultural film, believing that the central theme of the story was about keeping promises. He hired screenwriter Robert Towne to rework the script into something closer to his tastes. The final product was a mix of both Pollack and Schrader's concepts, yet neither were able to fully satisfy audiences of the time. Some wanted a hard-boiled gangster flick, while others preferred something more poetic, akin to Pollack's previous works. However, it's the fact that these clashing ideas were employed here that have helped the Yakuza hold up remarkably well over time. The story. The Yakuza focuses on Harry Kilmer, a private eye detective who has been stationed in Japan during the American occupation of the country. He's contacted by an old army buddy of his, George Tanner, to help him out of a major issue. Tanner remained in the country after the occupation was over and became a major shipping magnate, forming close ties to the Yakuza there. When a business deal involving guns fell through, the gangster Tono had Tanner's daughter kidnapped. Kilmer returns to Tokyo to help rescue her and reunites with a few of his close friends. There's Oliver, another army buddy and retired college professor who now spends his time collecting antique weapons. A gun collector in Japan? Alright, we'll roll with that for now.
Doctor advised me to lay off chess. It excites me too much.
Just playing chess.
If you take it seriously, it's very exciting.
But most important of all is Eiko Tanaka, Kilmer's ex-lover. Kilmer helped her out of her financial hardships, but she declined any marriage proposal. When the occupation ended, Kilmer left shortly after, although he bought Eiko a bar as a parting gift. Wow, generous. Eiko is overjoyed to see Kilmer again, and it's clear the two still have feelings for each other, yet they're still unable to marry. But Kilmer's main focus is with her brother Ken. Ken had been in the Imperial Army during the war, but didn't return for several years. When he found the two together, he was enraged and joined the Yakuza. Logical turn of events. Although he is no longer involved with any organization, he knows a lot about them, which is essential for the rescue mission. And Ken, feeling he owes Kilmer an irredeemable debt for helping Eiko, agrees to help. Naturally, things are a bit more complex than they seem. Characters have hidden motivations, and there are several mysteries that unfold just like a classic noir story. And of course, there's several action sequences sprinkled throughout to keep things interesting. Now, on a surface level look, nothing appears as though it would be revolutionary, so to speak. So what makes the Yakuza so special? Well, to start, let's look into the actual making of the film. It's estimated that around 95% of the movie was actually filmed in Japan, with only the opening being filmed in the US. The crew consisted of a lot of Japanese workers, including the cameraman. Not to mention, the Japanese characters in the film were actually played by actors of Japanese descent. Shocking, right? For most Hollywood films of the time, studios didn't really care if the race of the actor matched the character. That's how you get Toshiro Mifune playing a Mexican, for example.
Señor mayordomo. Evita, señor mayordomo. ¿Y qué le ven a ese?
And of course, there is the story itself. Japan isn't a background that could have easily been replaced by any other Asian country. Equal attention has been put onto the American characters and the Japanese ones, with a keen level of respect towards Japanese culture. One of the supporting characters, Duke, forms a relationship with Eiko's daughter Hanako and begins to take part in the cultural scene. Wheat, as an expat living in the country, considers Japan to be his new home and is equally enamored with it. Kilmer never looks down on the Japanese despite his overall pessimism, and tries his best to atone for his failures to Ken and Eiko. All of these touches make the film feel at least a little bit authentic for the time. And yet, the Yakuza is not exactly an action film, nor is it even really a gangster film. The drama has been put front and center, with exhilarating action sequences abruptly breaking the silence. But when these scenes arrive, we always care for who's doing the fighting and why, a must for any action film worth its salt. Through all of this, the concept of honor and what it means to both the Japanese and Americans is evident. It's held with utmost importance and drives everything within the narrative. In the Yakuza, to keep one's honor often requires a sacrifice, and it is not to be taken lightly. Eiko and Ken must make sacrifices to keep things together, and so must Kilmer. To avoid spoiling the ending, the film's coda has Kilmer atone for the violence he has caused. Mitchum's performance is very moving and brings the film to a proper end. Speaking of which, every actor here delivers a stellar performance. Mitchum delivers a wounded yet still hopeful performance that he wasn't always able to do with the films he made before. Takakura, already a star in Japan, should have achieved a much wider audience through this film, but unfortunately had been overlooked. And Dave Grusin's score is another treat. It's able to blend both Western and Asian influences extremely well without playing to any stereotypes. For its action scenes, the score interestingly plays against them, which makes the scenes feel somewhat surreal. Grusin can easily switch the score from melancholic to hopeful without feeling too jarring. Despite these many praises, there are still a few issues here that prevent this film from being a truly captivating one. Because the film is taking into account that a majority of the audience knows little to nothing about Japan and the Yakuza, it provides a lot of exposition. And I mean a lot of exposition. The first half of the film is devoted to this, the biggest example being Wheat's explanation of Kilmer's backstory. Stylistically speaking, it's appealing. Again, Pollock is going for the classic noir vibe. But the scene drags on way longer than necessary. Not to mention, the film feels the need to explain certain terms or ideas unique to Japan.
So how come you figure you can trust him?
Giri.
Giri?
Giri. Obligation.
You mean he figures he owes you something?
Yeah, sort of.
Well, that can work two ways, Kilmer. If you ain't alive tomorrow, he don't owe you shit.
Seeing that this information wasn't common knowledge or was often portrayed stereotypically, I can't entirely fault him for this. But the most controversial aspect, at least at the time, was its use of violence. And looking at the film today, it's a little difficult to see what the fuss was all about. Sure, it's pretty bloody, but a lot of action films today are far more graphic than what's in here. Basically, if you're a fan of films like John Wick, you'll likely have no problem here. When considering the film's initial lackluster response, I feel like a lot of the reason behind it is bound to the time it came out. In 1975, there just wasn't a large interest in Japanese cinema in the popular culture. There were the Kurosawa films, of course, and the Godzilla series, but those were already among the most acclaimed and profitable films in Japan. Not to mention, Americans aren't exactly known for appreciating subtitles. On the bright side, the response in Europe and Asia was pretty positive. It wouldn't be until nearly 20 years later that widespread interest in the culture came to be. Asian action films have been seeing successful releases in the US, and there was also the rise of anime. Later American films would exploit the subject, but none really had the same emotional resonance as the Yakuza. If this film had come out around that time, then things may have gone a bit better for it. When viewing the film today, it's also interesting to see the influence it's had on dozens of other movies that came after it. Ridley Scott would take a shot at the genre with 1989's Black Rain, which also starred Takakura. Although it followed similar beats as the Yakuza, it's by and large a buddy cop film like Lethal Weapon. The protagonist, played by Michael Douglas, learns about the virtues of honor and respect from Takakura's cop character, while Takakura learns how to mellow out. Most interestingly, however, is how this film would influence Paul's next script, Taxi Driver. The climax where Kilmer and Ken storm the hideout of the main villain serves as a warm-up to the finale that Taxi Driver brought 2 years later. The concept of honor is reiterated by Scorsese, who commented that Paul saw it as a kind of samurai death with honor. That's why De Niro attempts suicide. But for Paul, even Scorsese's relentless bloodbath was not violent enough. Scorsese said, he felt that if he directed the scene, there would have been tons of blood all over the walls, a more surrealistic effect, like Japanese movies. The Japanese way is to exaggerate and emphasize, thus making surreal. This comparison was also noted by Quentin Tarantino, a huge fan of the Yakuza. He went as far as to write a glowing review for it on the website for the New Beverly Cinema and helped to get it a larger audience. Tarantino even threw in a reference to the film in Kill Bill. Thanks to its release on home video, the Yakuza is slowly getting the praise and respect it should have received upon its release. As for the Yakuza eiga genre, it's ironically enough one of the best it has to offer. At the very least, it's a whole lot better than Steven Seagal's not-so-hidden remake, Into the Sun.
Muchas gracias.